A few weeks ago, as I was homesick from school and scrolling through YouTube on my phone, I saw a video in my YouTube recommended called Etude Number 4 on the AV Koskinen Archive YouTube channel, and because it was only 7 seconds long, I decided to click on it. It was just one note played on a piano keyboard, D3, and, confused, I read the description of the video. It read, "After many years of compilation of keyboard pieces, the master Koskinen found out that the most used pitch between Renaissance and 1948 music was D3. With the help of his colleagues, he managed to transcribe thousands of works into digital format and analyze them with basic computers. This humble etude proved to be Koskinen's crowning achievement in the field of musicology and research of keyboard music." This description was followed by a mysterious letter I in parentheses. Curious about the identity of this apparently great musicologist and composer that I had never heard of, I decided to look more at the channel, and before I knew what I was doing, I had a Google Sheet open on my computer where I was keeping track of everything I knew about the composer, with details found across the over 80 videos of his compositions on the AV Koskinen Archive channel. But as I did more and more research, I began to question whether or not this person ever existed. I'm the Dvorak devotee, and this is the wild life of Alvar Virtanen Koskinen. If you track down the accompanying website to the YouTube channel, you can find a full biography of the life of this non-existent person. I will read off this biography while also filling in some of the missing details I have found by looking around the YouTube channel. Before I read this, if you are bothered by any of the following themes, you can skip to the timestamp on the screen to skip past the main part of the biography. Most of these things are just as stated as happening during Koskinen's life without much detail, but I want to give any viewers who may be sensitive to the themes of sexual assault, schizophrenia and delusion, drug abuse, brothels, the early 1940s Europe, and pigs, just the chance to skip past this. I will still try to talk around things as much as possible without excluding key pieces of information that will be relevant later. Now, buckle up, because this biography gets pretty wild. Alvar Virtanen Koskinen was a Finnish composer who was born in Lappeenranta, a small town in southern Finland. He was born on December 24, 1924. Lappeenranta's Wikipedia page actually does not list Koskinen as a significant former resident, and the town borders Russia. His father, Jukka Virtanen Koskinen, was a woodcutter, which makes a lot of historical sense because Lappeenranta is actually historically having a lot of lumber mills. It is worth noting that his father was born on April Fool's Day, and his mother was born the day before. His mother was Päivi Järvinen, and she was a piano player, but she was not that great of a teacher. Both of his parents were of Finnish origin. As a child, he suffered harassment from his classmates at school, and this would make his works have a grotesque or Machiavellian component in the future. It would even create traumas that, over the years, led to a diagnosis of schizophrenia. If you've listened to any of his work, you'll hear a darkness that permeates throughout all of it, and a quick Google search confirms that it actually is possible for trauma to cause schizophrenia. I'm not sure that Machiavellian is an accurate description of his music, though, because that implies an element of manipulation or underhandedness that doesn't seem to be present in any of his works. At the age of 12, in 1936, one of his school teachers brutally sexually assaulted him, marking this terrible experience for life. He began his music studies with his mother at the age of 7, who taught him to play the first notes on the piano. At the age of 8, he began trumpet and viola da gamba disciplines. He never had great piano teachers, so he never developed great technique on the instrument, nor did he become a virtuoso on it or any of the other instruments he played. You could say his career had been finished from the start. Sorry. Anyways, it might be worth noting that almost none of Koskinen's future compositions feature trumpet or viola da gamba, but we're getting ahead of ourselves here. The website also does not give us any information on the identity of his teachers for these instruments. In 1941, for work reasons, Koskinen went with his father to Frankfurt, where his father would work in an industrial plant, and he would continue his musical and academic studies. This same year, Koskinen played the piano in numerous Frankfurt brothels to help his father financially. He also acted as organist in many of the churches in that city. That same year, a priest sexually assaulted him in the same church one night in 1941. That triggered a nervous breakdown that sent him to a boarding school in Xanten, where I followed his academic and musical studies. We don't know much about who this person is referring to themselves as I is here, but I have more information about that later. The following year, at the same boarding school, he met Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, and they became very good friends. Wikipedia can confirm that Stockhausen was at the same boarding school at this time, but Koskinen was about 3 years older than Stockhausen at the time. They regularly had talks about philosophy and music, which greatly influenced Koskinen. In 1943, Koskinen was threatened with conscription into a concentration camp for being considered a useless eater, so he was forced to work on a pig farm near Auschwitz. In 1944, he managed to escape and fled to Paris for a very short period of time. There, he met the figure of Pablo Picasso. Shortly after his arrival in Paris, the city was occupied by the Germans, so he fled to Spain. This is the only real allusion to 1940s Europe in any of his works or life history, but he likely harbored trauma for it. Also, the Germans took over Paris in 1941, so that's a bit of historical inaccurate information. There, it was a post-war country. It was a small town in the province of Burgos to take refuge. The description of the piece, 4 minutes and 32 seconds, says that he lived in Huerta del Rey, which is located in Burgos. He remained there until 1948. Its Roman theater and fields were some of the inspiration for his poems. From this, we learn that Koskinen also wrote poems, but I don't know if we ever see any. At the end of the same year, he returned to Paris, where he would live in the city suburbs, plagued by daily crime. He worked as a pianist in multiple brothels, but that work soon ceased due to his childhood trauma. If you remember, he worked as a pianist in brothels as a child, so that might have led to these traumatic experiences that caused him not want to go back. So, he decided to work as a delivery man. During that period, Koskinen lacked financial assets, so he carried out multiple scams selling counterfeit, contraband, and black market products. This led to him being imprisoned between 1950 and 1955. Much of what I have been reading at this point has been a direct quote, with me only fixing a few grammatical things or adding a little bit more information, but I really want to emphasize the fact that this next part is quoted directly from the website. He had a really bad time there in prison, and he was violated again by one of the prisoners who violated him several times a week throughout his sentence. An email that I sent to the archive states that the man who violated him ends up actually becoming one of his good friends, George Cowell, who collaborates with him on some of his pieces. Some of this information provided seems contradicted by the description of St. Koskinen's Passion, which states, in commemoration of the 40th anniversary of the composer's entry on the jail, which would indicate that he entered jail in 1955. However, I believe this just to be a wording mistake. A lot of the information surrounding Koskinen has small grammar, wording, and spelling mistakes, so that some of the information may be a little bit inaccurate at times. The reason why he was never released from prison early was this unsafe prison environment. It is at this moment, upon his release from prison, when, due to what he experienced there, he begins to abuse various drugs and medications. These drugs caused him to hallucinate various birds and animals, which made him approach the composer Olivier Messiaen, with whom he studied with from 1956 to 1962. It is at this time that he also met François Poulenc. From his negative transcendental counterpoint etudes, we learn that Koskinen actually studied music and composition with Poulenc in addition to just meeting him. Between 1963 and 1973, he dedicated himself deeply to the review, collection, and acquisition of scores of all genres. He dedicated himself to collecting works by unknown composers at the time and used them as material for his own compositions, from the first polyphonies to the newest hits of the Beatles, which gave him a lot of inspiration for his own works. The description of his Etude No. 4 states that he compiled a massive electronic library of music, which was one of his crowning achievements as a musicologist. From 1973 to 1978, he combined his work as a librarian with that of a piano teacher. That same year, after receiving a phone call from Stockhausen, in which Stockhausen encouraged him to move residence, Koskinen decided to travel to New York City to establish his residence there. Well, in France he had not done very well, and his economic assets were quite deplorable, so it is in New York where he really began to dedicate himself professionally to composition. In 1979, he released his first electronic work titled An Ant in New York, which tells of his trip from Paris to New York. On September 10, 1984, Koskinen returned to Finland due to the death of his mother. This would be the last time he would ever visit his hometown. It is at this moment when he composes Miserere Mortis. After this event, Koskinen's music becomes darker and grotesque, showing a clear tendency towards electronic music. According to the description of Miserere Mortis, this is one of the first electronic works and was messy because of it, which checks out. Also, it might be worth noting that the autobiography of Koskinen mentioned Miserere Mortis well before it was ever actually uploaded to YouTube, which I know because I've been tracking Koskinen and his work for a while, and I was surprised to not see Miserere Mortis up there when I first read the biography. Koskinen never had any notable students, given that he was a modest composer. Around the year 2000, we see that his music acquires a moral component. Since 1999, he sensed his death was near. Proof of that is in his work, Little Phone Ring Tune, which describes a missed call from death. He died in his apartment in New York on September 11, 2001, 3 hours after the 9/11 attack, of cardiac arrest due to excess caffeine, as he was very fond of energy drinks in his later stage. Koskinen also composed The Fridge of Darkness in 2001, which is likely where he kept the energy drinks, likely the ones that killed him. Koskinen lived a very tragic life, but despite this, he still loved comedy and making people laugh. The archive claims on multiple occasions that he had a great sense of humor, and much of his music contains these elements of that. Sometimes it's hard to tell the distinction between in his music is sarcastic humor and when it is serious pain. The description of his piece, Excerpts from My Childhood Diary, claims that the piece is incredibly dark because he had an incredibly dark childhood. However, his piece, Elegy for a Dead Friend, seems to suggest that almost all of his music is ironic on some level, because that work is described as a composition that doesn't include any jokes or sarcasm. A thing that I'd like to point out is that it's unclear if Koskinen's music is satirical or just ironic. Satirical would imply that he's making certain artistic decisions in order to point something out or make an argument, while his music being ironic is more just about humor and not doing things for their literal meaning. Koskinen's life and legacy had influence from many different people across many different time periods with many different effects. I'm going to separate these into 4 different main categories: real composers acknowledged on a surface level in his biography or video descriptions, real composers that Koskinen was said to have known, people whose existence is unconfirmed that play a major role in his life, and the mysterious parentheses in the description of every video. The archive makes references to make him acknowledging many composers in many different ways, whether it be playing one of their works, arranging his own compositions based on those composers' works, or being inspired by those composers. The composers that Koskinen makes smaller references to are Bach, Berg, Brahms, Chopin, Guido d'Arezzo, Handel, Hummel, Korsakov, Lachenmann, Mozart, Paganini, Schnittke, Schubert, Scriabin, Sibelius, Stravinsky, and Tomás Luis de Victoria. In addition to this, he was claimed to have some sort of relationship with certain composers, including being friends with Cage and inspiring him to write 4 minutes and 33 seconds with his composition 4 minutes and 32 seconds, and a lifelong friendship with Stockhausen, which inspired Koskinen to write An Ant in New York. He also, supposedly, studied under Olivier Messiaen, Francis Poulenc while in Paris, and he was supposedly dear friends with Armando Blanquer, who also studied under Messiaen under the same time as Koskinen. Blanquer is best known for his work for big bands, and I honestly had not heard of him before doing the research for this video, but he did exist. In addition to all of the real composers referenced in the life of Koskinen, there are also several people that we have no evidence of their existence anywhere on the internet. The first is William Hopkins, who is occasionally referred to as Mr. Hopkins. Hopkins lived from 1934 to 2004. He was a conservatory teacher at a conservatory that Koskinen was at some point. He had a farm before he was a conservatory teacher, and he is one of the performers of Infernal Travel 2, along with another character, George Cowell. It is unclear if Hopkins taught Koskinen, but in Suite in the Form of Variations, multiplication tables, the description states that Koskinen said, "I tried to represent as faithfully as possible how I sang the song of multiplication tables when I was in primary school. I promise you, Mr. Hopkins," which seems to suggest that Hopkins was a teacher who was judging Koskinen's composition. Hopkins also supposedly recorded The Light of His House and Koskinen's work Morbid Trance in B major for the video part, so they likely collaborated on several compositions. A comment on Etude No. 4 suggests that Hopkins transcribed many of Koskinen's works for four hands, which is interesting. Hopkins was also a journalist. Now I would like to read the description of the composition Little Cow, in memory of an angel. This might be one of Koskinen's most heartfelt compositions. Parallelism with Berg's violin concerto are obvious, especially in the title of the composition. And by the way, in case you didn't know, Berg's violin concerto is named The Memory of an Angel. The story behind this piece is quite unique. Koskinen's friend, Mr. Hopkins, used to own a farm before his official conservatory years as a composition teacher. Hopkins used to buy all his cows from his uncle, but one day he forgot to close the bull's enclosure, and the animal got one of the females pregnant, and so began the life of his most beloved cow, Dorothy. As the animal grew older and more beautiful, Mr. Hopkins started to feel a bond he couldn't believe. "It was like a dog to me," he said in one of the letters he sent to Cowell. But unfortunately, in the winter of 1985, a plague spread around the area, and half of his livestock died. Dorothy survived, but it was such a high-quality cow that Hopkins could not decline the offer from the local butcher. Koskinen's composition tries to portray the life journey of the animal, from a cute little cow to a juicy medium-rare steak on a plate. Hopkins had a son who died hours after birth. Koskinen composed a lullaby for him, which was only 37 seconds long. Hopkins died after choking on a nut after recording Via Klavierstück. George Cowell was another major character in Koskinen's life whose existence hasn't actually been confirmed. George Cowell was the man who did things to Koskinen while in prison, and he was also the person who said the phrase "silence please," which is something that seems to be very important in Koskinen's life. Despite all of this, Koskinen and Cowell eventually became friends, performing several pieces together, such as the Bad-Tempered Clavier together, as well as the aforementioned Infernal Travel No. 2. The next important character in Koskinen's life is Alexander Seljaju, a man who Koskinen met at the jail. This is one of the biggest discrepancies in the timeline of Koskinen's life. We know from the biography that Koskinen was in jail from 1950 to 1955, but Seljaju lived from 1956 to 2003. So unless Koskinen went to jail another time that we don't know about, there has to be something wrong with this information. Seljaju died 2 years after Koskinen's death from a bear bite to the neck, and he was a big fan of Stravinsky's ballets. Koskinen wrote an homage to Seljaju while he was still alive, and performed a transcription for 2 pianos of Scriabin's 6th Piano Sonata with him. The last of these seemingly fake characters is a music critic named Yefim Kiselev. The only reference to him comes in the recording of Koskinen's composition titled Childhood Remembrances, where Kiselev supposedly stated about it, "It stands as one of the greatest utterances of the soul. Koskinen's sense of harmony is on par with Ravel's Gaspard de la Nuit, and his musical narrative comes close to Chopin's greatest pieces." Now we're getting to the part of the video where things actually begin to get weird, as if they haven't been already. In the description of every single one of his videos, except for a few, there is a combination of letters, occasionally followed by a number, surrounded in parentheses. Assuming Koskinen is not real, I'm guessing that these are the actual composers of all the different compositions. However, the Koskinen archive has some other things to say about it. In the comment section of Constipatus Maledictus, a commenter inquires about the meaning of these parentheses, to which the archive replies, "It's a mark to show that what members found the compositions or edited the videos. Sometimes we forget these details." However, before I ever saw this comment, I emailed the archive directly and asked about the nature of these parentheses, and they responded with, "The letters of the descriptions are related with the characters that helped Maestro Koskinen to compose. As you may know, Maestro Koskinen was schizophrenic, so he interacted with several imaginary characters, specifically 4, Iron Van with the parentheses symbol I, Fat Man with the parentheses symbol F, I2 with the parentheses symbol I2, and Nogalyptus with the parentheses symbol N." What's interesting about this is that the 4 parentheses combinations we learned about in the email don't encompass all of the ones that show up on videos, and N, for Nogalyptus, never shows up on any of the videos. But it gets even weirder. In the description of Happy Birthday, Mr. Hopkins, we learn that Koskinen had 4 personalities, with all of them presumably coexisting in dissociative identity disorder. I too is apparently one of them, which might indicate that Iron Van, Fat Man, and Nogalyptus are all also alternate Koskinen identities. However, in a later email, I asked the archive if Nogalyptus was one of Koskinen's alternate identities, and they instead stated that Nogalyptus was some kind of god of the subconscious, who was the reason why Koskinen forgave Cowell for his actions. Anyway, here are all of the other letters that show up on videos. IFP1, IF, FR, IFRD, IN, IFP2, FA, IFL, IF question mark, IFP3, IR, FI2, IP3, and just a question mark. Also, some videos are blank. I suspected that a combination of these letters represented a collaboration between multiple members, and an email to the archive confirmed that suspicion. However, this leaves a few things unexplained. Why would there ever be question marks? Why are there numbers? Who are R, D, P, and A? I asked the archive a few of these questions and got some vague answers. However, what we do know is that each letter represents a different person, and R, D, P, and A are all smaller collaborators whose identities are still staying secret. In addition to this, R stands for Reuben. I also tried to decipher the identities of some of these other letters. Maybe some of them represent Hopkins and Cowell. Infernal Travel is marked IFP3 and is performed by Koskinen, Hopkins, and Cowell. Both of the bad-tempered claviers are marked by IF and are performed by Koskinen and Cowell. The transcription of Scriabin's Sixth Sonata for 2 pianos is performed by Alexander Seljaju and Koskinen and is marked IF. Some of the recording of Koskinen playing a piece by another composer are marked I, and others are marked F. Because of all of this information, it seems unlikely that these letters represent the different characters in Koskinen's life, even if they are creators of the channel or pianists. It might be interesting to note these patterns in the parentheses letters assigned to videos. Every single composition related to pigs has IF credited, and 3 of the Fluxes compositions have IF credited, except for Anti-Fluxes, which came much later than the first 3. The last mystery of the parentheses is in the form of the parentheses letter N, which we know to be Nogalyptus. In the comments of Transcendental Counterpoint Etude number -3, he is referred to as Saint Nogalyptus, and he's treated as someone you would pray to. An email from the archive states, Koskinen used to undergo DMT trips after he got out of prison. At some point, he met a divine entity, some kind of god of the subconscious. He wrote to Cowell about how this being called themselves Nogalyptus, and it taught Koskinen many things about the reality of the universe and humanity. It is said that Nogalyptus was one of the key elements that awakened his interest in experimentalism. Funnily enough, it was one of the reasons why he forgave Cowell for sexually abusing him in the prison, thus starting a beautiful friendship. They would even greet each other, saying, "Silence, please," remembering the old not-so-good days in prison. "Silence, please" is one of the most cryptic lines in the life of Koskinen. It first shows up in the form of the composition by the same name. The description of that video says, Koskinen went to watch the movie Toy Story in 1995, and he had some voices during that viewing. Those voices said, "Silence, please." In my email to the archive, I asked for more information about George Cowell, and they said that, specifically, George Cowell was the person who said to Koskinen, "Silence, please." Time after that, they became close friends because of the famous sentence, "Silence, please," which inspired a work by Koskinen in 1995 called by the same name, "Silence, please." All of this kind of has the implication that Cowell was just a schizophrenic hallucination of Koskinen's. However, because we have recording of Cowell playing, supposedly, it seems unlikely that he was just a schizophrenic hallucination. The phrase, "Silence, please," also seems to be very important to the archive, because they end one of their emails with, "Thank you for your attention, and remember, silence, please." This leads me to believe that the archive is a friend group, and "Silence, please" is an inside joke that they have with each other. In addition to this, as of recently, new compositions have had "Enjoy" in "Silence, please" at the end of the video description, and "Happy Birthday, Mr. Hopkins" includes "Enjoy" and "Silence, please" at the end of the lyrics. We have very little information about the identity of the archive. It seems that they have at least a few talented pianists in it, if they are the ones performing these works and not Koskinen. The website says, "From the A.V. Koskinen archive, our duty is to make the music of this unknown composer reach everyone around the world. To do this, every time we publish a piece here on the YouTube channel or on Spotify, we will announce it here," which they haven't done. The website is pretty much blank of any pieces. This is all of the most obvious information about them that we have. However, the note at the bottom of the email they sent me reads, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce this, just look at the screen to see what it says. Google Translate detects this to be Catalan. Koskinen's opera, Miao Miao Huao Huao, has spoken words in it that are in German, but so far I have not found someone to translate it for me, and I only speak English. One of the emails is addressed from Iron Van, and Iron Van is already known to be the parentheses letter I, so Iron Van seems to be one of the people working on the archive. This seems a bit strange because the archive also already said that Iron Van was one of Koskinen's schizophrenic delusions, which brings up a whole host of other questions. Another mystery is that, in addition to this, in the biography of Koskinen on the website, there is a line that says, "That triggered a nervous breakdown that sent him to a boarding school in Xanten, where I followed his academic and musical studies. We don't know who this I is, it could be Iron Van or someone else." But that also seems strange, because we know that Koskinen didn't really start most of his hallucinations until his post-prison drug addiction. Pigs seem to play a very important and key role in Koskinen's life. Koskinen, as we know from his biography, was forced to work on a pig farm near Auschwitz, so he had experience as a pig farmer from an early age. He wrote 6 compositions that I know of that feature pigs: The Cave of Pigs 1 and 2, Alpine Pigs, which is not available on my school-provided laptop due to web browsing restrictions, Spem Farsham, The Filthy Cathedral, and Suite in the Form of Variations Multiplication Tables, which features pig sounds in the last 3 variations. Koskinen famously once said, "Pigs are the closest animals to humans. That's the reason why we love their music." In the homage to Alexander Seljaju, the description quotes Koskinen saying, "I will be here for no much time, so I have to tell all what I live and all what I think to my dearest friends and to my little pig." This brings up an important question. Did Koskinen actually have a pet pig, or was it an affectionate nickname for some lover, possibly Seljaju? Actually, an email with the archive states that Koskinen was married 3 times throughout his life, all to women, and all of which ended in divorce. So we know nothing about the possible gay affairs that Koskinen may have had, but it's still fun to speculate. Koskinen hated the number 2 for some reason until about 1999. A YouTube comment from the archive says, when asked if he ever composed an Etude number 2, they said, "No, that's the funny thing. He wasn't very fond of that number, and sometimes he avoided it. We don't know why." According to the description of The Bells of Death, Koskinen believed that on the day of his death, 2 giant bells would ring, which could potentially explain his fear. The description of The Cave of Pigs 2 says, after he composed this piece, his beliefs on the number 2 being a bad luck number started vanishing. Alvar was very proud of this work. This might suggest that all features of the number 2 should either be demonic or be written after 1999 in his music, which is when Cave of Pigs 2 was composed. The description of the composition, Azrael's Dream, reads, 2 dark angels shall lay on a 19-sided table of stone. One will pour the blood of the wise, the other the blood of the blind. As the dense fluid stains the center of the shield, a sin-infused eye will be born. It will see everything, from the smallest worm to the greatest mind. Disgusted by God's demise in his own nature, it will close, die, vanish, and with that, a tower of smoke will be born from a star, and everything will be no more. This is supposedly an entry from Koskinen's personal diary, where he wrote down many of his premonitions. It features Koskinen's favorite prime number, 19, and his least favorite number, 2. Here's a list of every single one of his compositions that features the number 2 that was written before 1999. Infernal Trip 2, 4 minutes and 32 seconds, although that one is debatable because the number is 32, not 2. The Bad Tempered Clavier, Prelude and Fugue number 2. Brahms Intermezzo Opus 118 number 2. Scriabin Sonata number 6, adaptation for 2 pianos. 8-bit Preludes. Daytime Nocturne for 2 pianists and 4 hands. And Chess, which is also for 2 pianos. It can be solidly argued that Bad Tempered Clavier, Scriabin Sonata number 6, and Infernal Trip 2 are all demonic, but the Brahms intermezzo and chess are pretty debatable. I would like to mention now that every single time I'm typing out chess in my script, I'm using 19 S's, just the way Koskinen intended, because 19 was his favorite prime number. Anyways, here's every piece by him written in 1999 or after that features the number 2. 2 plus 2 equals 5. Suite in form of variations multiplication tables. Spem and Farcium 2. Krabby Patties, and Cave of Pigs 2. Here's every combination of parentheses and letters that has the number 2. IFP2, FI2, and I2. We know that I2 represents I2 from the email, which possibly suggests that one of Koskinen's main schizophrenic delusions was one that gave him demonic visions. However, there's no unusual correlation between 2 being used in the parentheses letter combinations and compositions being extremely demonic, so this seems unlikely. Here are some of my favorite fun facts about Koskinen. Koskinen tried to be featured in an ad by Chupa Chups but failed. He also asked specifically for a small cactus to be put next to the high register of a piano in one of his pieces so that the skewers of the plane would amplify the harmonics. Chess. Koskinen never learned to play chess, but he had a collection of over 30 chessboards with high-quality pieces. Trains. Koskinen worked many times in trains due to his travels, so he composed around 15 works in trains. From what we know, there are at least 4 infernal travels, and 9 works with other titles that were composed in trains, as the sketches of them say. Insects. The guy liked bugs. Yeah. Spotify. There is an actual Spotify account for Koskinen's music, but very few of his compositions are up on it. So, what can we take from the life of Alvar Virtanen Koskinen? It's possible that it's all satire with a message, with the intent to make fun of the practices of modern and contemporary composers. But I unironically really enjoy some of the compositions on the channel, which is probably related to the fact that I am a contemporary classical fan. So maybe it's all an elaborate prank to make fun of the taste of people like me. Maybe this whole channel is a serious way for a group of artists to advertise their work to the world though, which they certainly do successfully, especially with the past few days where the channel has grown exponentially. Some comments seem to suggest that he is a real composer with real-life connections, but Koskinen is a common enough last name that I'm skeptical of this. But I think the most likely explanation for all of this is that it's all just to make people laugh. So many comments seem to be indicating that it's just supposed to be funny. When asked in a comment if his recording of the Paganini concert etudes was a joke, the archive replied, "We aren't sure, but Koskinen's music is filled with humor, and that's for sure." So maybe learn something from Koskinen. Enjoy music and laugh a little. There were always so many terrible things in his life, with so much tragedy, mental health issues, and drug abuse. But he wrote music to make people a little bit happier, so let's all just have fun. It's what he would have wanted. I wanted to give a big thank you to the archive for all of their work uploading this music to YouTube. I've gotten so many hours of fun from trying to piece together Koskinen's full life, lore, and storyline, and a lot of the music is genuinely well crafted for what it is and hilarious. Also, many of the pieces feature some very talented instrumentalists, despite the wackiness of what they're playing. If you, as a viewer, have not spent time looking around his channel, I would highly recommend that you do. I've given a lot of information about Koskinen, but by not viewing it, you're missing out on so many beautiful little stories like those of Dorothy and Chess. Have a good rest of your day, and enjoy. In silence, please.